I wanted to start with this because it's not something I talk about very often. It's the structure of the cyclone season. And I wanted to explain a little about how to interpret it. We're talking about statistics here for the last 100 years or so, so of course you have to be careful. What you see here is the cumulative number of tropical storms that did not become hurricanes in red and those that did become hurricanes in yellow. You can see that the part of the season that is here, between the 30th of November and the 1st of June, still has some artifacts, particularly here in May. We then have a very stable period from the beginning of June until around the 15th or 20th of July. From the 20th of July, it really starts to rise. So when people say be careful, the risk of storms is mainly from the beginning of September. Well, no. You can see that from the 20th of July onwards, we really have a marked increase in the total number of cyclonic systems. Clearly, we have more storms than hurricanes, but we can still feel that things are moving a little. From mid-August onwards, the number of systems starts to rise sharply, meaning that there is a really significant increase in the number of systems and, above all, we see a shift, meaning that more storms become hurricanes than remain storms. This is a really striking feature beyond the number of storms that rise to the peak and then fall back very quickly afterwards. During the period from mid-August to around mid-October, which is really the most active part of the season, more tropical storms become cyclones than remain storms. This means that from mid-August onwards, when a system is named in the Atlantic, it is more likely to become a hurricane than to remain a storm. Then we see that from mid-August to the 10th of September is really the peak of the season. After that, we see that it goes down as quickly as it went up. We have an artifact here in mid-October, which is quite strange. I'd never paid too much attention before today. We really have a small peak, a small rise here in mid-October. It's not because there was a big cyclone, because we're talking about the accumulation of systems here. So there were a few fewer hurricanes, and then it continues to go down. As you can see, from mid-October onwards, there was a very clear drop in the number of systems. After that, between early November and late November, the whole month of November was more or less like June, and early July, not very active, and then we're out of the season. I think this table is extremely important so that everyone, and I'm thinking in particular of pleasure boaters and businesses, can get organized. That's what I wanted to start with. So now we're really going to get to the heart of the matter, and we're going to come and look at the ENSO oscillation. On the screen is a series of data records of water temperature anomalies in the Niño 3.4 zone in the Pacific. It is from this series that we establish whether we are in an El Niño, La Niña, or neutral period. Above 0.5 degrees of positive anomalies, we are in an El Niño episode. Below 0.5 degrees of negative anomalies, we are in a La Niña episode. Between the two, we are in a neutral ENSO episode. But there are clearly defined rules for changing between these states. When the CPC produces its monthly summary, the change of state must have been effective for 1 month, and the forecast must maintain this change of state for the following 3 months. In this case, the anomalies have been below plus 0.5 degrees for more than a month, and the forecast indicates that they will not cross this threshold again over the next 3 months. We can therefore conclude that at the next CPC monthly summary in about 10 days' time, we should officially be in an ENSO neutral episode. Another little thing that's important is that if we look at the May chart, we see stabilization here, and we don't go much below -1 degree. But if you look at the same forecast for February, you can see that it's not really the same thing. You see the descent was much steeper without slowing down, and we were dropping below 1 degree. So we have the impression that the forecast is softening just a little. There's not much to be pleased about, but it's always good to know, and the less severe the La Niña episode will be during the peak of the season, the better. Let's take a look at the water temperature anomalies. It's actually quite strange because there are 4 zones in the North Atlantic. Here, we have an almost neutral zone, a very warm zone here, with very high temperature anomalies, then a zone ranging from neutral to slightly high temperature anomalies further south, And then the fourth zone, which is the one we're most interested in, is the southern half of the major development zone, which still has significant positive temperature anomalies. If this zone extends a little to the west, which seems to be the case, it could be of major interest to the east coast of the United States, because a system moving up there, west-northwest, towards the coast of the United States, could encounter very warm water and strengthen quite seriously in this zone. Let's move on to water temperatures. You can clearly see the zone where it's a little cooler here, where the anomalies are a little lower, particularly south of Cape Verde. On the other hand, around the Caribbean arc, the water is already very warm, with 29.5 degrees off Guadeloupe, Dominica, and Martinique on the Caribbean side. We then have 29 degrees in a large zone approaching the Caribbean arc, and 28.5 almost everywhere between 50 west and the Caribbean arc and south of 17 north. These are temperatures that shouldn't be there during this period. We should be at 28 degrees or less in these areas. And unfortunately, this opens up a path here in terms of the energy available for cyclonic genesis. That doesn't mean that cyclones will form, as that will also depend on the other conditions, but in any case, there is potentially already the necessary energy in the southeast approach to the Caribbean arc for something to develop as of now if the rest of the conditions become favorable. And above all, such warm water at this time of year, when we are likely to be entering a La Niña phase with little wind shear, is a bit of a double whammy. It's a bit worrying, but we're going to have to learn to live with it. So we have seen that the ENSO oscillation is moving into a neutral phase, and we can see that in terms of water temperatures, we are already extremely hot. This does not bode well for the coming months. Let's take a look at the wind shear situation. As I always say, wind shear is very difficult to predict. At 48 hours, it makes sense. Beyond that, a little less so. And at 5 days and beyond, it's almost irrelevant. But we have to look at it anyway, because the information is there, and in any case, if I don't look at it, others will look at it for me and use these forecasts to try and scare everyone. So we can see that we still have this upper level westerly flow, which is a normal jet stream for this period, but which should normally start to weaken over the next few weeks, especially as we are no longer in an El Niño period. It's the beginning of June now, and that's more or less normal, which is why there are few cyclones in June, even though the water temperature could be high. That's because normally there's still a fair amount of wind shear. And if we look here, we see that where we had the warm zone, where we have potential in terms of energy development, we see that the wind shear is blocking everything. So for the next few days, there are clearly few risks. Here, on the other hand, if we move forward a little, then of course we're going to get into areas where the forecast timescales are far away and no longer of much interest, but here we are at 5 days, and we can still see a change in the pattern. In other words, rather than having a true westerly upper air current, we're starting to see an oscillation of the wind around the pressure troughs. This is a sign that the wind shear is changing and moving away from the winter pattern. Even if this forecast is for an uncertain future, we can still see a trend in all the numerical forecasting models. The risk of cyclonic development should therefore increase over the course of the month, which is perfectly normal. We'll see next week whether or not this trend is confirmed, which will give a good indication of cyclonic activity for June. Let's take a look at the sand and dry air. We can see that we have fairly dry air loaded with sand over the east of the MDR and much less over the west. The position of the anticyclone is the most important variable in determining whether or not there is dry air over the tropical Atlantic. It generates the winds that move the dry air and sand particles from the Sahara towards the Atlantic Ocean. When we look at the zone here, which is the zone I was talking about in terms of the heat of the water, there is no dry air and no sand in it. So fortunately, there is very strong wind shear and nothing can happen. You can also see on this map that there are already 3 waves circulating. The first is approaching the Caribbean arc, the second is between 40 and 45 degrees west, and the third is leaving Africa. This is the sign that the season is starting. As soon as we have tropical waves in this zone, we are really entering the season. In the forecast for the next few days, there's a little thing to the north of the Virgin Islands, which is in the process of finding its way between the two zones of high pressure here and here. A small drop in pressure is forecast, and it shouldn't go any further than that. We can therefore expect the NHC to start moving a little on this disturbance at the start of the week, but it is not threatening any inhabited land. So there is no real cyclonic risk this week. Satellite imagery over Africa shows that the waves are gradually beginning to organize themselves, another sign that the season is getting underway. That's it for today. If you haven't seen the last live forecast for the season, it hasn't changed yet. You can find the forecast in this video. See you all next week. Ciao.